Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with a discussion about the High Elves in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, and why I think it would make perfect sense and is very much needed for Creative Assembly to rework the High Elves alongside Slaneesh as part of the three races that are going to be affected by the Slaneesh DLC. It would also make perfect sense if Dark Elves were the third race as part of the package. The reason has to do with Dechala herself as a character. Like, Dechala is not only a former Asur princess, so that gives plenty of reasons as to why the High Elves should be reworked from a thematic standpoint, but also she's a former Asur princess of Nagareth, so even more sense to address not only the High Elves, but also the Dark Elves at the same time. Whether or not Creative Assembly does decide to do that remains to be seen. But in this video, I want to talk about the issues the High Elves do have in their campaigns, and why I do believe Creative Assembly should be looking to address in a patch, be it part of the Slaneesh DLC if they do decide indeed to include the High Elves, or a separate patch focusing on them, because there are absolutely certain issues. To begin with, we have to talk about the campaigns and the campaign mechanics of the High Elves. And there are certain issues with respect to that. So Tyrion and Teclis don't have unique campaign mechanics, and Teclis in particular, poor Teclis, his campaign has been underwhelming to say the least ever since he was introduced in Warhammer 2, and it also doesn't fit his character whatsoever. He should be more like Gelt, but also with a focus on diplomacy and world wandering, because that is exactly what Teclis does in the lore. When you look at Tyrion, yes, Tyrion is a really good campaign for a lore that doesn't have a unique campaign mechanic. But in other ways, there certainly are certain issues as well with regards to Tyrion, though more so issues with regards to the design of the High Elves as a race. Elfarion, well, the problem in Elfarion's campaign is that the dual start that he has doesn't necessarily serve him all that well, and it also is pretty annoying, I admit, to have to fight a bunch of manual battles to capture lords in order to use his unique campaign mechanic and get those kind of unique units. With Alariel is the question of the Defender of Ulthuan and the consequences of that system, because you get positives if all of Ulthuan is under High Elven control, but if a single region of Ulthuan is not under High Elven control, then you start taking penalties. Not necessarily big penalties, but they are there. Also, it can bug out. It certainly has bugged out in plenty of campaigns I have played the Valarial where it doesn't fill up. Like, even when all of Ulthuan is under High Elven control, the kind of benefits that you should get, you're not getting the max level benefits. So that is just a weird situation with respect to Alariel. Alifanar, yeah, he works a lot better, minus the climate limitations of his campaign, but if there's a High Elf campaign that does work, it is Alifanar, beyond inherent issues with High Elves. Same with Imric, like, it does work as a campaign, minus the fact that in every High Elven campaign, you're going to benefit greatly from going back to Ulthuan, because of the territory, the landmarks of that territory, and being able to confederate other legendary lords of the High Elves who have amazing skill lines that benefit your entire faction. So that is one aspect to address really with High Elves. The fact that Ulthuan is such a huge priority in every single High Elven campaign. Another thing to also address on this subject is the victory conditions, specifically long campaign victory conditions that require you to eliminate every Dark Elven faction, including ones half the freaking world away, like the Thousand Maws or the Blessed Dread. It's also not especially great for Tyrion to have a short campaign victory condition that requires him to go all the way to Nagarond to eliminate Malekith. That should be a long campaign victory condition, not a short one. And it's not just exclusive to Tyrion. He has kind of the worst aspect over there in terms of victory conditions, but he's not really the only one that has a bad situation with regards to those kind of victory conditions. So those are some issues specifically related to the campaigns. What about the race? Well, the influence system that High Elves gain is absurdly broken. So if I just auto-resolve this battle, you can see that I can gain up to 5 influence from fighting this battle, 1 per turn. And then if we want to spend influence, there are 2 ways of doing so. One, you can spend it on getting lords with really good traits, or heroes with good traits, or you can spend it on improving diplomacy between various factions. But the reality is so wasteful to look to manipulate diplomacy on the campaign map. And by the way, this entire UI, initially it's fine, but once you do start meeting a lot of factions, and you will be meeting a lot of factions as the High Elves, it will start filling up and it will become really, really tedious having to manage things over here if indeed you do so in any way, shape, or form. But just not really a great system to engage in, just too little influence, too much to spend it on. I'll give you a comparison. You look at Karl Franz. He has some really great things to spend the prestige on, but he can also gain a huge amount of prestige throughout the course of his campaign. Especially the more battles he fights, the huge amount of prestige that he does get, and he does end up spending it. Yes, Karl Franz's unique prestige mechanic, which is based on the influence system, is actually much better than what the High Elves have in terms of spending influence. So that is something that should be addressed. Another thing is how utterly broken High Elves are as a race, because there are certain traits that end up completely breaking the entire campaign dynamic of the High Elves and make their campaigns a joke. And specifically, there is the Administrator trait. You can get this on any Archmage Lord or any Mage hero. This trait gives you a minus 15% construction cost to all buildings in the local province and a minus 20% construction time for all buildings in a local province. This stacks. So what you end up with is an absurd level of power where a lot of the buildings that you do have in a campaign, can be constructed faster, if not instantly, provided you get enough Archmage Lords. Now, originally, it's not going to be that kind of benefit with just 1, but you can get more than just 1. You can get 2, you can get 3, you can get 4. Once you get 4, you're instantly constructing every structure in a settlement, pretty much, including very high-level structures. You're instantly constructing everything, and you're doing it for free. That is an absurd campaign situation, but it's incredibly beneficial to use it. Now, normally, these kind of Archmage Lords or Mages with that kind of trait would require you to spend a good amount of influence, but that's where the load save character system kicks in. So you can save a character, like you can play a campaign like Alfarian, load up, save a bunch of these characters, and then load them up in any other High Elven campaign. These kind of traits do need rebalancing. It is one thing for Karl Franz or the Empire to have the Noble trait, which gives you instant construction, pretty much, but you at least have to pay the cost of buildings in the first place. The idea that you have both free construction and instant construction in the same trait is simply absurd. And really, High Elves have been defined ever since Warhammer 2 by some of these completely absurd and broken traits in the game. So that is absolutely a very significant issue for them to deal with. These kind of traits. And the reason you want to use these kind of traits is because if you're not, it's not like High Elves, if they don't abuse things, aren't a good enough race. They are. But a lot of the fun unit roster is locked behind higher tiers. Things like Phoenix Guard, things like Sword Masters of Hoeth, things like Sisters of Avalorn, Dragons. They're all locked behind higher tiers. But it's not just units, it's also research. And it's also heroes. So if you're playing a High Elf campaign, for the most part, with some exceptions dependent on Legendary Lords, but for the most part, you will only be able to get 1 hero, a Noble, at tier 2. Everything else requires you to get tier 3. You only get 1 Mage at tier 3. And then you increase capacity of heroes at tier 4. and you only get Handmaidens of the Everqueen and Lore Masters of Hoeth at tier 4, unless you're playing a Lariel with respect to Handmaidens. This means that not only do you have a severe limitations of heroes early on in a campaign, but you also end up with a ridiculous situation where you're just outright recruiting a stack of heroes later on in a campaign. Because you get a settlement to tier 4, you can recruit all those heroes, and then you might achieve the short campaign victory condition, which gives you plus 3 hero capacity. It ends up being a pretty ridiculous situation from that perspective. And this creates a dynamic where High Elven campaigns, like virtually every other campaign, they're the most challenging early on, especially High Elves, because a lot of their economic potential does take a while to build up. So High Elves especially become much easier as you play through the course of their campaign. And the inverted difficulty curve is especially prevalent in their campaigns. Another aspect with this, beyond the limitations of unit recruitment, beyond the limitations of hero recruitment, you also have the issue of confederation. I think High Elves have some of the worst confederation situations in the game. The reason is, for whatever reason, confederating other High Elven Legendary Lords ends up being excruciatingly slow unless you're abusing certain things, like denying AI factions control of territory. It is especially bad with confederating Legendary Lords that start in Wolf 1. I'm not quite entirely sure as to why that is, but I do believe that this system needs to be handled better by Creative Assembly. Finally, we can talk about the research tree. A research tree that where you always want to go for the same things. Go with archery prowess, then go with spear roll, militia training, and then maybe you can unlock military advancements too, and get light to Filmar armor and precise fletching, and after that, a lot of the other things don't necessarily matter in a campaign. Well, with the exception of martial law. But these things do take a lot of time, but there's not so much choice with the research tree. Because a lot of the other things do require multiple building, either one higher tier building to unlock, or multiple buildings to unlock, like Ephelmar Smith and Grand Repository, or Elven Court Shrine of Asurian. This, by the way, requires you to get the tier 4 settlement. And also construct buildings that you would have no other need for necessarily at that particular point. So you're forced to get these buildings in order to unlock the research tree. This is not great, and these are the kind of reasons why High Elves do need a rework. To manage their traits, to manage the influence system, to improve their Legendary Lord campaigns, to give them the unique mechanics, to improve the climate situation, to improve the hero recruitment, to improve the research tree, the availability of units, the incentive to recruit other units as well. Because while High Elves are very strong with spearmen and archers, it does get very boring very quickly to just play one High Elf campaign after another, just recruit spearmen and archers, because it is an extremely effective army. So I would hope that Creative Assembly were to change that situation with respect to the High Elves. Now, another reason I think it would make sense for Creative Assembly to add a High Elven character as part of the next DLC that will feature Slaneesh. One of the things they mentioned in the video where they revealed that they're working on Slaneesh is that Dechala is wandering the world, forcing others to do her bidding. Well, there is a character in High Elven lore that may fit the bill of like someone who's wandering the world beyond Teclis, and that is Aislinn of Khatik. So you could have a Legendary Lord of Khatik that doesn't start with Khatik, but could start on distant shores, maybe in Ulthuan. I mean, we've certainly seen Creative Assembly start making some changes in this area of Cathay. So I think it would make sense if they were to add another Legendary Lord for the High Elves, and he would be focused on maybe a Cathayan adventure, maybe a counter to Lokir, just some ideas. That's all I had to say. Costin signing out.